Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I want to introduce our guest today, Maggie Elliot. Maggie worked with me for a couple of years with the TAWC. She received her master's degree from the Department of Agricultural Education and Communications at Texas Tech under Courtney Myers. Maggie did some phenomenal research while she was at Texas Tech, and she received several awards for that research as well. So we were really happy to have Maggie, but now then she's moved on to her career, but she has taken the time out of her day to share with us some of her research that she did while with TAWC. So Maggie, I'll let you take it from here and tell us about the perceptions of sustainability and what you learned while with our project.
Sure. Thank you, Sam. Man, I feel like the world has changed since I left this. I'm so excited to be here today to see some friendly faces on Zoom to share some of the work that I did while working with the TAWC. And so I know that right now I'm in a virtual room with representatives of the Texas cotton industry. I do not need to spell it out to you how important this crop is for the sanctity of the West Texas region and how important this water conservation is to economic resilience in the area. So really, this research project is born out of a need to better understand producers and consumers' perceptions of sustainable textiles. And really, at the heart of the issue is the idea that the Texas Alliance for Water Conservation was really starting to dip into uncharted territory regarding stakeholder perceptions and engagement. And as we all know, sustainability right now is a buzzword. It's a macro trend in marketing. But really, what does it mean? What does sustainability mean to different people? And what are people's priorities when it comes to sustainability in the textile industry? So that's what we were trying to grasp at, to better understand people's priorities within sustainability and really what do they want out of the system, so that as communicators, we can shape our messaging to better resonate with these specific populations. The two populations that we really looked at and considered was West Texas producers and consumers. And we'll get into that a little bit more later, but we picked these two key audience segments because that is where the Texas Alliance for Water Conservation could really use help craft messages to disseminate towards their population and better understand in their industry engagement activities what consumers wanted out of the system as well. So to do this, we used a methodology called Q methodology, which is a type of social science research that really seeks to better understand patterns of people's thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and worldviews. And if we can understand their patterns, then as researchers, we can look and be able to distinguish how people separate themselves into different groups. And that's really what this seeks to deliver, is how can we group people based on their beliefs and opinions to be able to shape messages that will best resonate with them. And so we did this. Q methodology is essentially where a participant sorts a series of statements according to the level of agreement. And they did this in the context of this study with all these aspects relating to sustainability in the textile industry, about cotton production, about textile processing, all those little, all those incongruities and nuances of this massive industry. To supplement the data, we also conducted a pre-sort questionnaire and a post-sort interview to really get a holistic, well-rounded view of an individual's perspective. All of the statements that those individuals sorted really related to our three pillars of sustainability. We wanted to understand how people prioritize elements of environmental sustainability, economic, and as well as social sustainability, thinking about really the welfare of the people and how all of these aspects can work together. If different populations had different priorities with all these three, that's really how we started all these statements. And this is the list of all the statements that these individuals sorted through. And if you look at this, you can tell that there are elements of all of those three pillars in there. We wanted to understand how people started, how if workers should earn a living wage, if sustainable textiles should be affordable for the consumer, if it should be profitable for the retailer, if they should be produced cost efficiently. We wanted to better understand how people prioritize all of these elements to really get together exactly what they wanted out of the system. So once we sorted all of these statements, we really wanted to look at two groups. And we chose Generation Y and Z consumers. Now, Generation Y and Z is a younger demographic. There is the people between 19 to 33 years in age, and they are newer. They're newer to the market, but within several generations, they will really ascend to be the buying power of the consumer population. We found these students at Texas Tech University. For the producer population, we looked at Texas High Plains cotton producers, and these were not all producers who were affiliated with the Texas Alliance for Water Conservation. Jeff Pate took me essentially on a tour of West Texas cotton gins, and we had producers physically sort all those statements. You can see that most of the producers were male, but I think that's representative of most of the cotton producers in the West Texas area. So once we gathered all these participants and we conducted the Q sort, ran it through the statistical software, we delineated distinct personas for each population. So we'll start with the consumer population. We uncovered 7 distinct personas within the consumer population, and we'll jump right in. The first persona, the first group that was really different was the community-minded consumers. And this population was very different. And you'll be able to see in a little bit what really distinguishes this group. And really the community-minded consumer support cotton producers above all else, and sometimes at the expense of environmental or social welfare. What was interesting about this group is that they came from small communities. They did not come from urban communities. They did not have family that farmed. They were not part of a farming family, but they came from small communities who depended on farming for the economic livelihood of their area. So they understood that agriculture was really important to their community. And it makes you wonder if entities such as 4-H or FFA help foster some of these support for agriculture. So they very truly believe that sustainable textiles sold in the U.S. should be grown by U.S. producers, and that growers should be supported with subsidies. So they were just very much in support of cotton producers. And this was very different from our next consumer persona, which is the individualistic consumer. And really, the individualistic consumers embody the characteristics of the fast fashion movement, meaning that they want affordable, accessible clothes. Within the last 10 to 15 years, the textile industry has really changed in that people are buying much more clothes than they ever have. And so this mindset of this persona really reflects that. Just people want what they want when they want it. That they don't care how that affects the environment or the social welfare of other people. So it's a little bit more self-oriented. And yeah, that is really what distinguishes this group. The next persona of the consumers was the skeptical consumers. And this was interesting because while the skeptical consumer highly prioritizes environmental constructs, they exuded a distinguished distrust of agricultural producers. They really seemed to believe that agricultural producers were exploiting the land and were all out for profit, and didn't agree with any of the infrastructures in place to help support producers. And so that was very interesting, is that they highly prioritized environmental elements, but they did not trust agriculture producers to any extent. And so they were very favorable to oversight and regulation from government entities. The next group we called consumers for capitalism. And this group was really distinguished as they view money as a way to balance social injustices, believing it is the responsibility of the retailers to hold themselves accountable. And so they believe that even if people are not working in unfair or are working in unfair conditions, or if there are aspects of their livelihood that maybe aren't the best, that if they are compensated through money, then that's a way to balance all that. So really, money is a balancing factor to every aspect of this world. And they believe that regulation, that oversight, is the responsibility of the retailer. So they believed in mass production and in meeting the demand of the economy, but that essentially money was the way to carry over some of the injustices that happen in systems such as that. The next group was passive environmentalists. And passive environmentalists really value the environmental constructs most likely to personally affect them. And what this means is that they cared about some environmental constructs. They cared about air quality. They cared about water quality. They cared about what would most personally affect them. They did not care about biodiversity. They did not care about enhancing wildlife habitat or recycling. They just wanted what would be best for them. And they didn't know a lot about the industry as a whole. They kind of exuded a distance from that. But it was interesting to see how they could piece out just exactly what would work for them. Again, a little bit more of a self-oriented approach to this, but also a passiveness of not really caring and not being super concerned about the state of the textile industry as a whole. The next group was the environmental sentinels. And these individuals are staunch defenders of the environment and really evoke a global outlook of the textile industry. And so this group, they, as you can say, so the passive environmentalists, they really care about what affects them. Environmental sentinels really take a big picture approach. They're concerned with what is happening in the world. They are concerned about greenhouse gases. They are concerned about soil health, and they are not in favor of GMOs. All those really big picture issues that are really what is important. The last persona for consumers were the think local consumers. And really what bound the think local consumers together is that we believe that the key to solving a lot of the current problems, whether that be labor conditions or living wages, or just paid wages, is that if we were to keep industries regionally based, then we can solve all those problems. If we could return textile processing back to the United States and deal with it as a country, then that would solve a lot of the problems we have. If we didn't transport everything all across the world, then we would save on greenhouse gas emissions and fuel. And so just that idea that sustainability should be thought of as proximity, that sustainability should be local, it should be regionally based. That was the most important and salient aspects to this group. So that was all the consumer populations. Now we'll move on to the producer personas. So out of our 20 producer participants, they sorted themselves into 6 groups, 6 distinct personas. The first of which were autonomous producers. Autonomous producers were interesting in that they really prioritized elements of production that they could just personally control as managers of their own operation. And really looking back at some of the demographic data, it just so happened that these producers operated the least amount of acreage, the smallest amount of acreage out of all the producers that we surveyed. Another thing that really distinguished this group is that they believe that sustainable cotton should be grown without chemicals. And that is not an opinion that you see very often in the Texas High Plains, but it is important to note that there is this population in this group that really does not believe in the use of synthetic chemicals in cotton production, which I think is an interesting note. The next group is bottom line focused producers. And this group are really business oriented professionals who recognize profit as a means of protecting the land and the workers. And I'd like to note that I think sometimes we get, when we're thinking about personas, it's really easy to just it's really easy to say profit above all, that all they care about is money and making money. And really that is not how these producers see the bottom line. For them, making money is a way of being able to invest in the environment, to have the capability and the structure to be better stewards of the land, to be able to enable financial security for their workers. And so it goes far beyond just accumulating wealth from themselves. And so I think that's a really important distinction, and that profit really is a means of reaping all these benefits for their community and for the land around them. The next group was consumer-driven producers. And consumer-driven producers are different in that they view themselves as a piece of a larger system. And they really rely on the expertise of that system, believe in creating a safe product in an environmentally friendly way. They know that they do not create demand, they do not for demand, and so they know that they follow demand, and they seek, at the end of the day, they seek to serve the consumer. So they highly prioritize that textiles should be safe for consumers, and they understand that in the large mix of things, it'll likely be profitable for the retailer. And it's interesting that they rejected the concept that sustainable cotton should be profitable for producers. But I think there's a little bit of realism in that sense, in that way of thinking of that's just the way the world works, that they believe that in this trend that at the end of the day, it's their job to produce safe cotton for individuals, and money is not an entirely huge driver for them. Next group is public servants. And public servants work to fulfill an overarching goal of serving the public good and reflect a balanced approach to making contributions to society. And this was interesting because they take the big picture. They look at, as a cotton producer in the United States, what do we do? And they believe they clothe the world. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. But that service that they provide to the nation and to the world, that they believe that, yes, growers should be supported with subsidies, and in turn, the work that we do should support local communities, that it should support soil health, and then that it just needs to be part of a system that really feeds back into itself and works to provide a public good to everyone. And so this was a very distinct approach to the profession of cotton production as well. The next group was cotton is king producers. And these producers are really driven by an inherent pride in producing the highest quality fiber. They also recognize themselves as experts in their field, and really believe that as experts in their field, everything that they do is to produce the highest quality cotton. That is their driver. That this textile should be manufactured without polluting water systems, low emissions of greenhouse gas, everything really working to promote the highest quality cotton. With all the time and the dedication and the research that they exert in performing that capacity, they see themselves as experts. And thus they reject the idea that retailers or the government should provide any oversight or regulation to them in their own affairs. They truly believe that they should have autonomy to do what they want on their own operations. And the last persona is the practical agriculturist. And this persona really was interesting in that they view the challenges of production agriculture as a lifestyle with own traits of hard work and discipline. They didn't try to alleviate. They didn't believe that in the best world of sustainable textiles, that the hardships will not be alleviated for producers. The mental and physical stress associated with agriculture, they really see that as being woven into a sense of identity, that it builds discipline and traits of hard work and character. And so they're very proud of their product and believe that, clothing that is sold in the United States should come from cotton sources within the United States, and just really believe in the system of building character through the profession of agriculture. So what does all of this mean? I will admit that when I looked at the consumer data, I was a little taken aback because as you saw, consumers really didn't care much about the environment when it came to the end of it. And what was really interesting is that in my interviews with them and in the questionnaires, I mean, they talked about, yes, they care about the environment. Yes, they care about the social welfare of other people. But when it came down to the actual sorting process, they sorted far higher qualities about price and accessibility and style. That's what resonates with them. And so it kind of left me in a lurch of, well, what does sustainability mean if we can't rely on a person's inherent altruism and goodwill? What does that mean for the larger idea of sustainability? And as I've continued in the communications profession, I keep unearthing these traces of, yes, people say that they want biodegradable, kitchen soap, but when it comes down to it, it's really the price that matters. It's the price that takes the day. And so I think this is really important as a marketing professional for industries and for retailers to realize that for them to be able to promote sustainable textiles, there has to be an economic incentive for the consumer to make that decision. I think this also speaks very highly to the importance of third-party certification labels. We've seen how powerful these labels have become in terms of organic or non-GMO. There's a way for the textile industry to make a same heuristic, a same mental shortcut for people to address if there were to be a sustainability label in some aspect of cotton or textile sustainability. For instance, we see that in the skeptical consumers, they really lack trust in producers, while the environmental signals did not have any trust in the retailers. And to both of these consumer populations, the traceability was important. Traceability, the ability to track and trace the path of cotton and the textiles was really important to them. So I think that the integration of a label into this industry would be very salient to these two groups and would really help the industry gain ground in that sector. And really what this test does is it tells us what's different about all these different groups. You've heard about what distinguishes all these different personas. But what I'd like to speak on now is really what similarities the producers had. And for me, these similarities were very heartening. Every single producer ranked water conservation as a very high priority, the first or second priority. And I think that this says a lot about the efforts and the messaging systems that entities such as the Texas Alliance for Water Conservation have driven forth in the culture of West Texas, because these producers were not all affiliated with the TAWC, but they still recognize that water conservation was very important. And so that's something really striking that I took away from this study. Also, I learned that all the cotton producers are very selectively attuned to the operations of West Texas. They're not, they're not very concerned with foreign workers abroad or social aspects, in global ramifications overseas. They're astutely concerned with what is happening in their backyard, what's happening in their region. And so as communicators, I think it's really important to understand that if we were to frame messages in a way for it to be regionally or contextually based, that those are messages that will most likely resonate with those populations. And lastly, I think it was really important to note that all of these producers can make a very consistent value of supporting local communities. And this was something that was very different from the consumer population. In fact, essentially what delineated that very first consumer population, the community-minded consumers, is that they cared about their communities. All the other personas, that was just not a factor that was very important to them at all. So I think as we're learning about this, it's really important to note that this trend about giving back to your community and how important that is, and really how the entire profession of cotton production and decades and after decades and perhaps even generations of growing cotton, how it asserts a sense of identity in our growers. And what I thought was really interesting is that, yes, this identity of cotton production, it's it's in each cotton producer, but it manifests in different ways. For instance, public servants seek to advance the common welfare of people. That's really a key inherent sense of their own identity. Cotton is king producers are proud to produce a high quality product. Practical agriculturists value the traits of hard work and discipline, while bottom line focused producers carry a strong sense of responsibility. These are really innate, inherent qualities in each individual. And so I think that if entities like the Texas Alliance for Water Conservation could work in some of these factors into their messaging systems, those could be very powerful ways to resonate with these key populations. And so that's my presentation. That's what I had for you today. I'd like to thank all of you for your time and would be happy to answer any questions.
Maggie, this is Chuck West, and I've got a question for you.
Sure.
A couple of questions, actually. One is that the various personas, did you come up with those definitions, or are those part of your academic circle that this is how you categorize people?
Sure, that's a great question. So essentially through the statistical process, it's essentially a delineation of a factor analysis. And so it's how people rank all of those statements, and you understand exactly how they rank them. And so from those rankings, you gain an idea of what they prioritize and what they don't care very much about. And so through that's how we came up with those ideas of what they cared about. I came up with the titles essentially. Everything, all of those statements about what they cared about, what they supported, or what they rejected, that came from the individual. And so, yes, I named each group, but it was fueled through all of the data, if that makes sense.
Well, good. So wouldn't there be some people who actually belong to more than one group? I mean, it sort of reminds me of those personality tests, where you
Sure.
are called a XYZF or whatever,
Sure.
And but there's some gray spots in there, and some people say, well, I'm this, but I'm also that,
Sure. And so that's something that the statistical analysis does is it rates everyone on their similarities, right? And so some people don't fit into one of those buckets. In the consumer population, there were people that didn't fit the category. And in the producer population, there were 3. Everyone else cleanly sorted themselves into a group. And so it does represent them enough to that degree that they did fall into that group according to the statistical guidelines.
My last question is, where you indicated that personas rejected a particular trait. Did they actually reject them as disagree, or they just ranked them at the bottom of their?
Sure.
I mean, they did actually say, "Oh no, I don't want children to be safe."
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, right. Good point. So here, I'll see if I can go back and show you what the board looks like, the Q-sort board, because it rejects a little bit of a harsh card. You can see it's a pyramid structure that essentially goes from left to right. And so what you can't really see, but in the center of the pyramid is essentially the statements that they deem neutral or indifferent about. And then on the left, those that they view negatively or that they agree less with. And on the right side is those that they agree more highly with, that they agree more with. And so it is that sliding scale. And so the ones on the left are negative and the ones on the right are positive. It starts at 0 and then it goes out 6 and then in front 6, like -6 plus 6. But I also, there's a pre-sorting component to it where I ask everyone to, before they start sorting on the board, to sort the statements that they agree with, the statements that they disagree with. And so then from that, I use that as a tool to really distinguish if they reject it or if they just care about it less. If that
okay.
makes sense. And in many cases, they blatantly disagreed with many of these components. So yeah, that's a good question that we were able to step into those pieces.
I see. Well, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Dr. West.
Thank you, Maggie. We appreciate your time today.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure.
Well, if there's no more questions, I guess we'll conclude our meeting, and I appreciate everybody that joined in.
Thank you, Sam. Good job.